Welcome to another interview with Cheers Dears. I am host and author and creative warrior S. Faxon, and today we're talking with Catherine Pomeroy about her book, The Gulch Jumpers. Catherine, welcome to the show.
Thank you. So happy to be here.
Now, full disclosure, listeners and watchers, Catherine is the first to be traditionally published author with No Bad Books Press, which is the publication house that my friend Teresa Halverson and I manage. But Catherine's book is so amazing and it's so wonderful and such a beautiful story that I had to share it on this podcast. And your book will be coming out hopefully here in November. And your story really captured me in so many levels. You know, you talk about everything from homelessness, race relations, human rights, the legal issues, and drug addiction, and all sorts of vices that come with that. But most importantly, it talks about the heart, and family. You want to tell us a little bit more about your story, Gulch Jumpers?
Yeah, sure. And I think you captured it pretty well there. But the Gold Jumpers, is a novel. It's a road trip story. It's about three pretty unlikely characters who are thrown together under unusual circumstances, and they find themselves on this, I guess we'll call it a quest for a musical miracle. So the three characters are Ellie Sanders, and she's an attorney. She has her own practice in Cleveland, lives with her husband, kind of a workaholic, kind of controlling, trying to stay busy to avoid dealing with a private loss that she's suffered, which is not immediately revealed in the story. And then the second character is Ray Jones, and Ray is a elderly musician. The Gold Jumpers is a bluegrass band in the story that was big in the 60s in West Virginia. He's the surviving member of the Gold Jumpers, but he's fallen on hard times. He's homeless, kind of broken. So even though he has this amazing musical talent, like he's a multi-instrumentalist, he has perfect pitch, he can write music. He's kind of a crushed and devastated person. And then the third character is Brandy Sarandish, and Brandy is actually staying in the same homeless shelter as Ray. And she and Ellie have some history because they used to be party friends, clubbing friends back in the day when they were in college and they were young. But their paths have taken very different turns, and Brandy has fallen into drug addiction, and she's lost custody of her children. So the story is really how these three characters get thrown together on this very unlikely road trip from Cleveland into Appalachia and then into the Deep South, to try to help Ray with his wish to go to the crossroads in Mississippi. It's kind of based on the Robert Johnson legend. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Yeah.
So
please expand it for our listeners. Yeah.
Yeah. So Robert Johnson, I mean, the myth is that he went to the crossroads and he traded in his traded his soul in exchange for musical talent. So Ray's idea is that he already has musical talent. So he wants to go to the crossroads and like exchange it or pawn it in exchange for information about his lost daughter. So they embark on this kind of fantastical, kind of pointless road trip. And it's about their escapades along this journey.
And their growth along the way.
That's right. Their relationships, how they change, how they influence each other. Yes.
And you can almost follow along with the book and go on your own adventure with it, because you talk about all these really specific landmarks, and it seems like kind of a fun journey to take off with your own friends and to discover these places.
I would actually love to. I've been to some of the places. I would love to redo the route of their trip. I've not been to all of the places. So like Gatlinburg, for example, when I wrote that part, I've never been to Gatlinburg. So I wrote away for like travel brochures and, just looked at pictures and, tried to imagine what it would be like to go there. That was before the fires did a lot of damage there.
It's so fun doing research as an author because we get to, not only escape in the world that we've created, but we can also dive into the world that exists around us and explore and travel to all these different places, even just from the comfort of our own desks or couches or wherever we write.
Right.
But it's so fun.
Exactly. Yeah. And I have been to parts of Appalachia, like Southern Ohio and stuff. And when I was working on it, I remember my husband was driving. I was just looking out the window and I was just writing down everything I saw, like so Red Man tobacco signs on the side of barns, trailers, anything I just saw off the road, just writing it down. So
Well, that's fun.
catch that vibe.
That's a great way to do that. I'm going to start doing that whenever I'm on road trips now.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, just, billboards that you see or like tent revival signs, just, some things that might be kind of peculiar to that region.
Now, one of the fun details of your story is how Ellie gets coffee and donuts on the start of their adventure. And donuts are a really big part of the story. It's just a subtle detail, but it's fun. Would you say that coffee and donuts might be the signature snack and beverage for your story?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think any road trip, you have to be fueled by caffeine, especially if you're driving. So absolutely. And yeah, I like to say that the excessive consumption of donuts and coffee by these main characters are going to make you feel better about your own coffee and donut consumption.
Definitely made me want coffee and donuts as I read it. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And also the characters kind of bicker about it as well, or try to find like the best donuts. And sometimes they're not always successful. They can only find like gas station donuts. They turn their noses up at that.
I like the one comment about how it was better than shelter coffee or something like that. It was really cute.
Right. Yeah. And some of that was, oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, I have to ask, what's your favorite donut?
Oh, definitely chocolate. Chocolate with chocolate frosting. Yep. No doubt about that.
With super chocolate.
Yes. And we're particular about our donuts too. So different places that have better donuts.
I don't know that I've had that. So now I have to find these.
Yes.
Two very good elements put together. It sounds fascinating.
Yeah. And I think the characters use donuts to break the ice too, when they're trying to, negotiate with new characters or try to get other people to go along with something that they're trying to do.
Well, offering food is such a welcoming exchange.
Absolutely. Food is always a good bribe.
Now, Catherine, tell us a bit more about the inspiration behind your story. This is a multi-layered book with a lot of different social issues. If you could talk a bit more about what was behind some of the inspiration for all that.
Yeah, and you're right. There was so much, but I think, professionally as an attorney, I deal with a lot of cases that deal with drug addiction. That's something that's we're really dealing with in Ohio, especially heroin, methamphetamine, and I deal with child welfare law where people are losing custody of their children. So I see a lot of those social issues, homelessness. Had a chance to tour a homeless shelter, and I think that kind of inspired my thought about, what if this really talented, broken musician was living in a homeless shelter, and what would that be like? And I think also just things that I'm interested in. I really love music. So I had a lot of fun researching music for the story, just listening to different bluegrass artists and blues. And I listen to the Bluegrass channel on my satellite radio. I have a long commute, so I listen to a lot of that going back and forth in my car. Plus, I would also say just members of my own family, because, we hail from some of the Appalachian regions. Like my grandfather was a coal miner. My uncle played in a band that played like at the Wheeling Jamboree in West Virginia and some of those places. So some of that family lore, I think, just inspired all of this. I guess just a lot of things kind of came together.
Melting pot of ideas.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's really sweet. And I always love to hear it when authors can take inspiration from their own life. And that I think is one of the most organic ways of growing a story is just to look at what's around you or to draw on memories of what did grandma talk about at the dinner table or, those things that we can very easily weave into the plot and the characters. And it makes the story almost write itself.
Right, exactly. And I think sometimes when you get into that rhythm with the writing, sometimes the beginning's a struggle, I think. And I'm not a person that sits down and plots out. I know some writers will like do charts and, every plot point. I am a fly by my seat of my pants writer. I don't know how it's going to end necessarily. I just want to go with it. But I think once you get into that flow, then I think for the reader as well as the writer, it just starts to click.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate that. And one of the things I've learned on this podcast is that every single author has a different method for how they put the story together. And it ranges from flowcharts to Excel documents to Post-it notes. And it's really interesting to hear how it's pretty much split down the middle of pantsers and plotters. And it's always really fun to see that and to hear everybody's different methods of doing it. And which kind of brings me to my next question, which is, were there any challenges on your journey to publishing the Gulch Jumpers? And if so, what were they and how did you overcome them?
Okay, so let me think. I think it took a full 5 years to go from the idea to published novel. Barriers, I guess I would say, are rejection was a big one. I did send out a lot of queries. I think I was initially trying to query literary agents, and I was just getting, a lot of rejections. A couple bites of interest, send us 50 pages, then I get a rejection. And I was going to writers' conferences around the same time, in the Cleveland area, and just trying to learn as much as I could. And someone suggested, why don't you just start approaching like small indie publishers directly instead of trying to get an agent? And that I think that was what worked for me, going that route. Probably a combination of luck as well as, just not giving up, which I think is really important when you're a writer, is to not give up. Because it's pretty solitary, and I think you can get discouraged, so it's good to have that encouragement. So
yeah, and having tenacity as an author or really any artist is so important, like you said, because it is very solitary. And one of the biggest tips I lend out to other authors is join a group, whether it's a Facebook group or TikTok or something, or like a meetup group. Find your people who are also writers, who are also at the same or growing level with you, if that makes sense. Because there's so many groups of established authors, and then that can be intimidating because, it's great to shoot for the stars, but then they're talking about Hollywood agents, and you're like, I am not there yet. And it can be a little intimidating. And then, that imposter syndrome thing can start to happen.
Yeah.
And that happens to pretty much all of us. But yeah, finding a group that's in your genre or who is similar to your stage of writing, and you guys can encourage each other and be there to support one another. And it is a very lonely art that we have, but having those networks helps you to build, helps you to grow, helps you to find routes that will get you to your publishing goals.
Right. I think for me too, accountability was kind of a big thing. I was pretty open about the fact I was writing a novel. So I talked about it to a lot of people, or, posted about it on social media, or just, so I think then, people see you and they're like, how's your book going? So you have to, you can't give up because you're kind of out there open that you're working on it. So yeah, I think it's challenging. I didn't consider self-publishing just because I'm not real great at all that stuff, but I think that's a route that's pretty legitimate too for people to pursue. But there's a lot of books out there, as you know, so there's a lot of competition.
There is. And, another piece of advice I impart is always find your genre and find out where your audience is hanging out. So, for me as a fantasy writer, I know there's a lot of very active fantasy groups on Facebook and on TikTok. So I'm going to be targeting my marketing to them. And the great things about readers is that they tend to not read only one book and will try to find more and more like that book that awed them. So if you can find down comp titles or comparative titles or similar titles to your own stories and find out where those people are hanging out, where they're going to find their next reads, that's a really great way as an independent or even a traditional author to find your readers and to hopefully get your book in their hands.
Right. I think that's really important. Yeah.
Now, I have a listener question for us here today.
Okay.
And that comes from Ronnie F., who is one of my newsletter subscribers. And she would like to know, what are some of your favorite books to read?
So I like fiction as well as nonfiction. Let's see. As far as fiction, I think Cold Mountain is one of my favorite stories. Charles Fraser, because it's about the South and Appalachia. So I like that vibe. This is a children's book, so it's a little odd, but Holes by Louis.
It's a great book.
Okay, Holes. Okay. Yeah, I think it's a really great book too. I don't know why that is something that I think about, but I think it's maybe because it's kind of got almost like a fairy tale type feel to it. And I love when the attorney general swoops in at the end and closes down the detention camp, because that probably appeals to the legal part of me. Let's see what else. I just like really good writing, so like Donna Tartt, Goldfinch. I wish, when I read something like that, I wish I could write like that. But it really just anything that's fun. I guess anything that's not boring is a good choice. Right now I'm trying to get through a really long book that my younger child gave me for my birthday, and it's like over 500 pages, and I'm trying to stick with it. Kind of power through.
I feel that in fantasy, they tend to be very long because there's so much world building involved, and it's important to know these things, but at some point it's like, do I need to know the history of this one township's legacy? Is this really going to build into the story? And so I know that there's definitely an expectation for some stories to be super long based on their genre, but I'm also noticing this growing trend within the indie community of shorter fantasy, especially stories that are about half the size of what you would see, like the Tolkien's, like the George Martin's, the super long, beefy guys, and that we're kind of turning away from that, which is sort of interesting. And you can just split it up, just make it multiple books.
Right. And sometimes that's easier for the reader to digest that in a smaller,
less intimidating.
Yeah, exactly. I think I just like a good story that kind of sucks you in and gives you that hook. As we were talking, I thought of another one, which is let's see, The Rocket Boys or October Sky, Homer Hickam. It was a movie too, but the book is just so good, so well written.
I haven't read the book, but I saw the movie and it was beautiful. That's a really good story.
Yeah. And that's that whole West Virginia, coal mining type feel as well.
Now, your book also reminded me, and Teresa and I have talked about this. So I think actually we all three of us talked about this, how it also has that sort of feel of Fried Green Tomatoes, of where, older person gets found by somebody not related to them, but they share this incredible adventure together in this beautiful story. And so listeners, that's another thing to kind of think about with Catherine's book, is this sense of finding family and building family too is a very prominent theme throughout this. And even if you're searching for your family, or you don't know who you are or whatever, or what have you rather, finding that community and building your own tribe is just really a beautiful story.
I think the idea too of not letting someone else define who your family is a big part of it.
Right.
You can create your family, and the theme of lost children, adoption. Quite a few people have told me this book has made them cry. So I'm ready to start a club of Gulch Jumpers criers.
I'm a Gulch Jumpers crier. So
yeah, I actually cried a little when I wrote it in a couple spots. So
it hits you on a level because you feel, we're so entrapped with your characters, and they're so, I know this is kind of a cliche thing to say, but they're so lifelike and relatable. And even though these are experiences I can't begin to imagine, I still felt Ray's pain when he's explaining to Ellie that he wasn't able to marry the woman he loved because they were Black and white. And that is just so heartbreaking.
It's unbelievable. Yeah. And that was,
that this, as you talked about in your book, it is based on our real history and very relevant recent history at that. And, you talk a lot about the social dividends in Cleveland as well, and how this is a contemporary story, but that there's still a great divide of the haves and the have-nots as well. And, any story that sheds light on that is just really powerful, because it reminds us of how far we've come and yet how far we still have to go.
Right. With racial segregation, segregated housing, different cemeteries for Blacks and whites. It's pervasive. Yeah. Yeah. So, and that was something that was important to me also, to put that twist in there. I think sometimes you take some risks when you write about race in a book, but I felt like it was important to do that. And one thing that bothers me a lot as a reader is I sometimes feel, and maybe it's just the books that I'm picking, but sometimes I feel when I'm reading novels that characters are almost assumed to be white unless somehow proven otherwise. And that always really bothers me. So, trying to figure out a way to portray this authentically is, challenging, but I think it's something we should strive to do.
Yeah, and to tell our true story, if you will.
Yes, right. Right.
Well, Catherine, would you like to tell our listeners what's next on the horizon for you?
Oh, okay. Well, I have finished my second book, and it's in the hands of some worthy publishers. So we're waiting to see how that goes. And I'm working on my third book right now. So excited about that.
I'm excited about that.
Yeah. So I don't know if you want me to mention a little bit about what those two are about, or.
Yes, please. Let's hear it.
Okay. So my second book is about a single mom in Southern Ohio raising two teenage boys. And her older son gets charged with vehicular homicide and is put in jail. He's 17 years old, and he has some mental health issues going on, some synesthesia. I'm not going to pronounce that right, but that's when you're getting
you see colors.
Yeah, you get your senses mixed up, like colors and sounds, and
or hear colors. Sorry, excuse me.
Yeah, so she's trying to figure out how to keep her family together and navigate through that. And then the third book that I'm working on is in a totally different direction. And it's about what happens in a very isolated housing community, a HOA kind of in the middle of nowhere, when a solar flare happens and basically takes out all the electricity and satellite in the United States. So that one's just completely different.
That sounds fun.
Yeah. Yeah, that one's going to be fun.
Huh. Well, that's all very exciting, and can't wait to read all that. And Excuse me. And how can people find you?
CatherinePomeroy.com is my website. And I'm on Facebook, Twitter. I'm not too active on Twitter, but Facebook, Catherine Pomeroy at author.
Well, thank you so much, Catherine, for sharing all that with us here today. It was such a joy getting to talk to you about the Gulch Jumpers and your next works that are ahead. Listeners, be sure to check out the description box where I will have all of Catherine's updates and her website and all of that below. And again, Catherine, thank you so much for joining us. Cheers.
Thank you, Sarah. Cheers. Here's my virtual coffee.
A huge thank you to my sponsors, Sal Bomb and Don W. And to see how you can buy me a coffee, head on over to buymeacoffee.com/sfaxon.